1692. In the quiet town of Salem, Massachusetts, life was simple, but never easy. The winters were harsh, food was scarce, and fear of the unknown lingered in every home. The people of Salem were Puritans, strict, deeply religious, and convinced that the devil himself walked among them. To them, every misfortune had a sinister cause. A dying cow, a failed harvest, a sick child. Surely it must be the work of witchcraft. And so, when a group of young girls began to scream, convulse, and speak of dark visions, the town believed their worst fears had come true. They were certain witches were hiding among them. But fear is a dangerous thing. Fear spreads faster than truth. And in Salem, fear grew like wildfire. Neighbors turned on neighbors. Friends became enemies. And before the year was over, 20 innocent people would be executed, hanged, crushed, and destroyed in the name of God. This is the story of the Salem witch trials, a story not of witches, but of hysteria, a story where innocent men and women were condemned for crimes they never committed, and a story that still haunts America to this very day. So, let's step back in time. Let's walk the dirt streets of Salem, and let's uncover how a small village's fear of the devil unleashed one of history's darkest tragedies. Salem, a small Puritan village in Massachusetts. At first glance, it looked like any other settlement of the New World. Wooden houses, muddy dirt roads, children running in the fields, and families praying inside their little church. But beneath the quiet surface, Salem was a village drowning in hardship. The winters were long and merciless. Snow would bury homes, livestock would freeze, and food supplies would vanish before spring arrived. A single failed harvest could mean hunger and death for an entire family. Disease was another constant shadow. Without medicine, even a simple fever could take a life. Mothers buried children, husbands buried wives, and grief became as common as prayer. And then there was the fear of attack. Salem stood on the edge of the frontier, where conflict with native tribes was always near. Families lived with the thought that danger could strike at any moment from beyond the tree line. Life here was survival, day by day, prayer by prayer. The people of Salem were Puritans, strict followers of faith. They believed the world was a battlefield between God and Satan. To them, every joy was a blessing from the Lord, and every misfortune was a punishment or an attack from the devil. The devil was real, not a story, not a symbol, but a living presence, a dark figure who walked unseen among them, whispering in the night, corrupting hearts and sending his servants, witches, to carry out his evil. In Salem, nothing was just an accident. If a child fell ill, it must have been a curse. If a cow stopped giving milk, surely the devil had touched it. If two neighbors quarreled, suspicion rose. Perhaps one of them was a witch. Fear lived inside every household. Fear of sin, fear of punishment, fear of the unknown, and most of all, fear of one another. This fear was like dry wood piled high, waiting for a single spark. And when that spark came, Salem would ignite into hysteria, a hysteria so powerful, it would take the lives of 20 innocent men and women and leave scars that history has never forgotten. In the cold winter of 1692, the home of Reverend Samuel Parris, minister of Salem Village, became the center of something terrifying. Inside his house lived his 9-year-old daughter, Betty Parris, and his 11-year-old niece, Abigail Williams. 2 ordinary young girls who would soon become the spark that lit the fire of hysteria. It began quietly. The girls complained of strange pains. Then came the screaming fits, the twisting of bodies, the sudden collapse as if some invisible hand was choking them. At night, they cried of dark visions, of shadows, of black figures whispering in the corners. The family was terrified. They called for the village doctor. The doctor examined the girls but found no natural explanation. His conclusion was simple and deadly. This is the work of witchcraft. And with that single statement, fear in Salem exploded. Soon, other young girls in the village began showing the same symptoms. They screamed, convulsed, and pointed trembling fingers at people in the crowd, shouting, "She is the witch! She torments me in the night." The people believed them. Why wouldn't they? These were innocent children, too young to lie, too young to understand the weight of their words. The first to be accused were 3 women who stood at the very edge of Salem society. Tituba, Reverend Paris's Caribbean slave, a woman from a foreign land, already distrusted for her strange stories in different ways. Sarah Good, a poor beggar, often seen muttering under her breath, asking for food and coin. Sarah Osborne, an elderly woman who had been sick and rarely attended church, a grave sin in Puritan eyes. 3 women, 3 outcasts, easy targets for suspicion. When brought before the villagers, the young girls screamed, collapsed, and cried out that these women were attacking their souls. The crowd gasped, horrified, and in that moment, accusation became truth. The people of Salem believed the devil had entered their village, and these women were his servants. But this was only the beginning, because once the first accusations were made, the children would not stop. Their cries grew louder, their visions darker, and each time they named more witches, more neighbors, more innocent lives. Salem was no longer a quiet town. It had become a hunting ground, and no one was safe. The spark had been lit, and Salem was burning with fear. What began in the Paris household spread like wildfire. The girls' screams echoed through the village, and each day, new names were spoken. A mother, a neighbor, a friend. Anyone could be the next witch. The people of Salem had no defense against accusation. Once a child pointed at you, your fate was sealed. You could deny the charges, but who would believe you over a child claiming to see the devil's work? The girls claimed they were tormented in dreams and visions. They said they saw dark shapes, spectral figures, and the faces of those who walked among them. This spectral evidence, dreams and visions, was accepted by the court as truth, and that truth condemned the innocent. Accusations spread for many reasons. Some were born of fear, others of greed. If a man wanted his neighbor's land, he could whisper a word, plant a seed of doubt, and soon the crowd would cry, "Witch!" If 2 families held an old grudge, what better weapon than to let the children accuse? Jealousy, anger, revenge, all of it disguised as holy justice. Within weeks, dozens were accused. Poor women, respected farmers, even church-going elders. No one was safe. Imagine living in Salem then. Every knock on the door, every whisper in the street, every sideways glance could mean the end. A wrong word, a suspicious look, and tomorrow you could be standing in the courtroom, trembling before judges as the girls screamed your name. Fear controlled the town, and fear is contagious. As more were accused, more people confessed. not because they were guilty, but because confession offered survival. Deny the charge, and the gallows awaited you. Confess to witchcraft, and perhaps, just perhaps, the court would spare your life. Innocent men and women, broken by fear, began admitting to crimes they never committed. They named others, hoping to save themselves. And so, the fire of accusation grew higher, brighter, deadlier. Salem had become a village of spies, informers, and betrayers. Husbands accused wives, children accused mothers, neighbors accused neighbors, and in the center of it all, the court prepared to deliver its verdicts. The stage was set. The trials were about to begin. The fire of accusation had consumed Salem, and now the courts were ready to turn fear into judgment. In June of 1692, a special court was created in Salem. Its name was the Court of Oyer and Terminer, meaning to hear and to determine. Its task, to try the accused witches and deliver justice. But in Salem, justice was already poisoned by fear. The courtroom was a stage of terror. On one side sat the judges, stern and cold with the Bible in hand. On the other, the accused, mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters trembling for their lives. And in the middle, the screaming children, pointing fingers, falling into fits, swearing they saw the devil's mark. The judges accepted spectral evidence, dreams, visions, and invisible spirits that only the accusers could see. If a girl cried out, claiming she saw your spirit tormenting her, that was enough to condemn you. How could anyone defend themselves against a dream? The first to stand trial was Bridget Bishop. She was outspoken, independent, and different, traits that Puritan society distrusted. The girls screamed in her presence, clawing at their necks, claiming her spirit was choking them. The court believed every word. Bridget Bishop was found guilty and sentenced to hang. Her execution marked the beginning of Salem's darkest days. As the trials continued, more and more were brought in. Respected elders, church-going women, honest farmers, no one was safe. Some broke down in tears, swearing they were innocent. Others stood tall, refusing to confess to lies, even as the gallows awaited them. But innocence did not matter. In Salem, accusation was guilt. The villagers packed the courtrooms, hungry for spectacle. Each trial was a performance of fear, the children screaming, the accused begging for mercy, the judges slamming down their verdicts. Outside the courtroom, the gallows stood waiting, and soon it would claim its first victims. The Salem witch trials had truly begun, and the darkest chapter was only just unfolding. June 10th, 1692. The first victim of Salem's hysteria was led to the gallows. Her name was Bridget Bishop. She walked with chains around her wrists, surrounded by guards. The crowd gathered in silence, waiting, watching. Some whispered prayers, others stared with fear in their eyes. Bridget was accused of being a witch, of sending her spirit to torment young girls. She denied it until the end. But the court had spoken. As the rope was placed around her neck, she cried out her innocence. Her final words vanished into the summer air, and the trap door beneath her feet fell open. Bridget Bishop was dead, the first of 20 souls to perish in Salem's nightmare. The weeks that followed were darker still. One by one, more were brought to the gallows. Sarah Good, a poor woman who had long begged for food in the streets. Her crime? Being disliked, being different. As she faced her executioners, she cursed the judges and declared her innocence. The crowd gasped, and then the rope silenced her forever. Among the most heartbreaking cases was Rebecca Nurse, a 71-year-old grandmother, respected and loved in the village. She was known for kindness, for her devotion to faith. Yet the children screamed her name. The court declared her guilty. On the morning of her execution, she walked to the gallows leaning on her cane. Her frail voice carried one last prayer to God, and then she too was gone. But perhaps the most horrifying death was that of Giles Corey, an 81-year-old farmer. He refused to confess to being a witch, not because he was guilty, but because confession meant lying. The court had no verdict, but they would not release him, so they chose a different punishment: pressing. Giles was laid on the ground and heavy stones were placed on his chest, one after another. The weight crushed his ribs, his breath, his body, but he refused to give in. With his dying strength, he spoke his final words, words that echoed through history: more weight. And then, silence. By the end of the trials, 19 people were hanged on the gallows, one man crushed to death. Dozens more rotted in prison, their lives destroyed. In Salem, the devil was never found, but fear, hysteria, and injustice claimed the lives of the innocent. The gallows stood as a grim reminder that when fear rules over truth, even the righteous can fall. For months, Salem had been drowning in blood and fear. Neighbors turned against neighbors, families were torn apart, and the gallows claimed life after life. But by late summer of 1692, whispers of doubt began to rise. At first, it was only a murmur, a question asked in secret. What if the court is wrong? What if the innocent are being killed? The turning point came when the accusations grew. Too large, too unbelievable. Even highly respected citizens, wealthy landowners, church members, even the wife of the governor himself, were accused of witchcraft. If the devil could be found in the most devout and powerful, then who could be trusted? The very leaders who once fueled the trials began to question them. Judges hesitated, ministers debated, and ordinary villagers, once eager to point fingers, started to see the truth. One man in particular raised his voice. Increase Mather, a prominent minister, he declared, "It is better that 10 suspected witches should escape than that one innocent person should be condemned." His words struck Salem like thunder. For the first time, people began to see the injustice clearly. In the courtrooms, cracks began to show. The girls' fits and screams, once seen as holy proof, now seemed like theater. Their accusations grew wilder, less believable. Some whispered that the children were lying, that they enjoyed their power. Spectral evidence, visions and dreams, was questioned. How could unseen spirits be trusted as proof of death? The tide was turning. Then came a final blow. As more and more prominent people were accused, the governor himself could no longer ignore the madness. He dissolved the court of Oyer and Terminer, ending the cycle of death. By October of 1692, executions stopped. The gallows grew silent, and the nightmare of Salem finally began to fade. But for the families who had lost their loved ones, the turning point came too late. Innocent men and women were gone forever, their names names forever tied to witchcraft. Salem had woken from its fever, but the scars of hysteria would never truly heal. The gallows had fallen silent, but the echoes of the Salem witch trials haunted Massachusetts for years to come. When the executions ended, the village was left in ruins, not of buildings, but of trust, of community, of faith itself. Families who had lost loved ones demanded answers. How could men and women of God have condemned the innocent? How could neighbors have turned so quickly into enemies? In the years that followed, shame began to spread through the colony. Judges who had once sentenced dozens to death admitted their error. The very men who claimed to serve justice now begged forgiveness from the families they had destroyed. The church itself confessed that the trials were a mistake, a stain on the soul of Salem. Some officials even fasted and prayed, asking God for mercy, but no prayer could bring back the dead. For the families of the victims, life could never return to what it was. Children grew up without parents. Widows carried grief like a heavy cloak. The names of the accused lingered in shame, until, slowly, generations later, they were cleared of guilt. It took more than 250 years before Massachusetts fully apologized for the trials. A monument was raised, engraved with the names of the victims, a small gesture, but one meant to restore their dignity. Today, Salem is remembered not for witches, but for the danger of fear itself. The witch trials have become a symbol of hysteria, a warning of what happens when suspicion replaces reason, when lies are given more power than truth. Even now, the story of Salem echoes in our world. It reminds us how fragile justice can be, and how quickly fear can destroy the innocent. As you listen to this story tonight, remember those 20 souls who died not because they were guilty, but because their world was blinded by fear. The Salem witch trials may belong to history, but their lesson belongs to us all.